Welcome to Shadow Fable. Don't forget to subscribe. Dr. Elaine Rivers stared at the swirling ink of the ocean through the porthole of the research vessel Odyssey. The night was thick with humidity and uncertainty. Even the stars above seemed reluctant to shine, obscured by low-hanging clouds. The expedition had begun as a routine deep-sea survey, but now it teetered on the edge of inexplicable phenomena. Whispers of something ancient lurking in the abyss. The ship's corridors hummed with the quiet intensity of the crew. Each step down the narrow passageways resonated with the rhythmic pulse of the vessel's engines. Elaine's mind, usually sharp with scientific logic, now danced with the disquieting pull of half-formed thoughts. Her colleagues exchanged furtive glances and hushed words about the anomalous sonar readings and unsettling images caught by the submersible's camera. Rumors had swirled even before departure. An obscure cult had once prophesied a call from the deep, linking a series of unsolved maritime disappearances with eerie signals emanating from the trench. At the center of this unfolding mystery was Dr. Elaine Rivers, a woman whose professional brilliance was matched only by her hidden scars. Her past was a labyrinth of secrets, a childhood marked by neglect, and an early encounter with a bizarre psychological disorder that blurred the line between reality and nightmare. Now, as she prepared to dive into the inky depths, Elaine carried the weight of both scientific ambition and a personal compulsion to confront her inner demons. The dive commenced under a canopy of turbulent skies. The submersible, a sleek metal capsule engineered for extreme depths, descended into darkness. Inside, Elaine and her team, including the stoic navigator Malik and the enigmatic technician Inez, were bathed in the low glow of instrument panels and the pale luminescence of the deep. With every meter that passed, the pressure of the unknown pressed in, both physically and psychologically. As they neared the trench, the submersible's cameras began to capture startling images. Ghostly, undulating shapes that moved with deliberate grace, and faint bioluminescent signals that suggested an intelligence far beyond simple marine life. Malik's voice crackled over the comm system, tinged with awe and apprehension. "Something's down there, something watching us." Elaine's heart pounded in time with the rhythmic beeps of the sensors. The images on the monitor were disturbingly beautiful, a surreal interplay of light and shadow, reminiscent of ancient cave paintings. Yet, beneath the beauty lay an aura of menace. She recalled reading about real-life deep-sea expeditions that encountered phenomena defying explanation. Cases that had been dismissed as hallucinations or the result of isolation. But this was different. The data was too clear, too deliberate. In the sterile darkness of the submersible, Elaine's thoughts turned to the cult's lore. A forgotten sect that had vanished after cryptically predicting that the sea would reclaim its secrets. The cult's writings, replete with esoteric symbolism and references to the call of the deep, had long been dismissed as superstition. Yet now, as Elaine's eyes traced the shifting shadows on the submersible's screen, she couldn't help but wonder if there was a kernel of truth hidden in those ancient texts. The submersible glided past towering rock formations and into a cavernous expanse within the trench. There, the team observed a massive, undulating wall of bioluminescence, a pulsating mosaic of light that seemed to communicate in a language of color and rhythm. For a moment, time stretched. The silence inside the craft was palpable, broken only by the low hum of machinery and the collective, unspoken dread of the crew. It was then that Elaine first heard it. A subtle murmur, almost imperceptible, that seeped through the static of the comm channel. The sound was not a mechanical glitch, but something far more organic, as if the very water was trying to speak. Her pulse quickened. The sound was reminiscent of the whispers that haunted her dreams, fragments of voices that seemed to call her name. Was it the ocean, or was it a manifestation of her own haunted memories? The experience unsettled her to the core, dredging up memories of a particularly dark period in her life when her mind had betrayed her in moments of loneliness and despair. Now, the deep ocean had become an echo chamber for those internal voices, voices that questioned her sanity and her purpose. Malik's voice, steady yet tinged with concern, broke through her reverie. "Dr. Rivers, are you with us?" Elaine's response was a quiet affirmation, but inside, a storm was raging. The crew pressed onward, navigating through narrow crevasses that hinted at the ocean's hidden history. The atmosphere was suffused with a raw, elemental power, as if the very pressure of the water was a living force intent on crushing them. In that claustrophobic tunnel of rock and water, every creak and groan of the submersible amplified their vulnerability. The further they descended, the more the environment seemed to warp around them. The light from the instruments danced erratically, and even the familiar hum of the machinery took on an ominous tone. Inez, who rarely spoke, stared intently at the readouts, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and fascination. "It's almost as if the trench is alive," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the din. Then came the twist. A sudden, inexplicable surge in the submersible's power system that plunged them into darkness. The emergency lights flickered on, casting jittery shadows that contorted into monstrous shapes. In that disorienting moment, Elaine's mind raced through a cascade of possibilities. Had they triggered a latent mechanism in the trench? A trap set by nature or by unseen human hands? The possibility of sabotage, or even an act of deliberate provocation by those who believed in the cult's ominous prophecies, crept into her thoughts. In the stuttering light, she noticed something even more disturbing. A series of markings on the wall of the cavern, etched deep into the rock. They were not natural formations, but deliberate carvings, symbols that bore an uncanny resemblance to the cryptic iconography found in the cult's forbidden texts. Elaine's breath caught. Here was tangible evidence that human hands had been here long before any scientific expedition. A dark reminder that the trench was a crossroads of forgotten rituals and unsolved crimes. The submersible's systems rebooted after a tense minute, and the lights stabilized, revealing the carvings in stark detail. Malik's eyes widened as he deciphered the markings. "This isn't just nature, Elaine. This is man-made." The weight of his words settled like a stone in her stomach. The implications were staggering. Someone, or some group, had been here, orchestrating events from the depths of human history to the present day. As the submersible continued deeper into the cavern, the atmosphere thickened with a sense of predestination. Each moment was a delicate balance between rational investigation and the lure of the inexplicable. Elaine's inner dialogue churned with conflicting thoughts. A scientist driven by empirical data versus a woman haunted by the spectral echoes of her past. The pressure was not just physical. It was the burden of unraveling a mystery that might redefine everything she thought she knew about the world. The turning point came unexpectedly. The submersible rounded a bend in the cavern and came upon an enormous submerged structure. It was unlike any natural formation. A decaying edifice of stone, its architecture reminiscent of ancient temples, but with an unsettling modern twist. The structure exuded a cold, calculated aura, as if it had been engineered by a mind steeped in both fanaticism and advanced technology. Elaine's heart hammered as she observed the intricate designs that wove together elements of ancient ritual and modern schematics. The symbols here were even more elaborate. suggesting an organization that had evolved over centuries, blending myth and reality. In the silence of that underwater mausoleum, the voice returned. Louder this time, as if emanating from the very walls of the structure, it recited phrases in an indecipherable tongue. The sound was both mesmerizing and horrifying, a chant that resonated with a mechanical precision, evoking memories of obscure true crime cases where the perpetrators left cryptic messages behind. Malik's hand trembled on the console. This can't be random," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. Elaine's mind flashed back to her own troubled past, a series of encounters with shadowy figures, instances where she had narrowly escaped the clutches of an obsessive mind bent on controlling destiny. Those moments, once dismissed as isolated incidents, now converged with the reality before her. The structure was a relic of a conspiracy that transcended time, a secret forged in the depths of both the ocean and human depravity. In that charged silence, every crew member was caught in the grip of an unspoken terror. They were intruders in a world where nature and human malice intertwined, a world that refused to adhere to the rules of logic. The submersible's instruments began to register erratic fluctuations, and Elaine's instincts screamed that they were being drawn into a vortex of malevolent design. The walls of the structure seemed to pulse with an eerie life of their own, each rhythmic beat a countdown to an inevitable revelation. The descent into the structure became a test of will. Elaine, with a mix of determination and dread, led her team through narrow corridors within the ancient edifice. The architecture was a labyrinth, a maze of stone passageways lit only by the flickering glow of handheld torches. In the confined spaces, the interplay of light and shadow created a disorienting mosaic, and every footstep echoed like a drumbeat, heralding something momentous. The atmosphere was oppressive, saturated with the weight of unseen eyes and whispered secrets. It was there, in the dim corridor of a crumbling antechamber, that the true nature of their mission became unmistakable. An inscription, carved in deliberate haste and now barely legible, recounted a tale of ritual sacrifice and promised rebirth, a story that paralleled notorious real-life cases of occult-inspired crimes. Elaine's mind raced as she pieced together the fragments, the clandestine meetings, the shadowy benefactors financing the expedition, and even subtle hints of a hidden agenda among the crew. The very expedition was entangled in a web of conspiracy, where the line between scientific inquiry and fanaticism blurred dangerously. In that moment, suspicion crept among the team like a slow poison. Every whispered word and sidelong glance took on a sinister subtext. The realization struck hard. Some among them might be complicit in resurrecting the dark legacy encoded in the temple's stone. Elaine's own inner turmoil mirrored the external chaos. Her rational mind battled with the creeping fear that perhaps she had been chosen for this moment, either as the one to uncover a hidden truth or as a sacrificial lamb in a ritual centuries in the making. The climax arrived when the submersible's power faltered once more, leaving them stranded in the echoing silence of the ancient structure. In that stilled darkness, as the team huddled together, the enigmatic voice swelled to a crescendo, a final, unyielding command that resonated within their very souls. The walls vibrated with the intensity of 1,000 forgotten prayers, and the symbols seemed to glow with a spectral light. Elaine felt her sanity teetering on a knife's edge, caught between the terror of what lay ahead and the realization that every moment had been meticulously orchestrated. In the ensuing minutes, as emergency protocols flickered in the failing lights, the hidden truths emerged. A desperate confession from one of the crew members revealed that the expedition was not merely scientific. It was a calculated act by a clandestine organization intent on reviving an ancient cult. The cult's modern incarnation had infiltrated research circles, their members driven by a fanatical belief in the power of the deep, where humanity's sins were meant to be washed away. The confession was a revelation that shattered any remaining illusions of safety. Trust dissolved, replaced by a raw, elemental fear that in the depths, the human soul was laid bare. Elaine's mind whirled as she processed the revelation. Here, at the bottom of an ocean trench, the conspiracy had manifested in a physical, tangible form, a convergence of human ambition, ancient superstition, and the inexorable pull of the abyss. With trembling resolve, she gathered her remaining strength, determined to document every detail, every secret etched in stone, as a testament to the nightmarish reality of human frailty. The truth, she realized, was more horrifying than any fiction. When the power eventually surged back and the submersible systems roared to life, Elaine was forever changed. The expedition, intended as a scientific voyage, had become a crucible where the darkest aspects of human nature were exposed. The revelations would haunt her long after she returned to the surface. A reminder that beneath the surface of our everyday world lies a realm where myth and reality, sanity and madness, intertwine in a deadly dance. In the aftermath, as the Odyssey ascended through the water column and the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, Elaine's eyes remained fixed on the deep. The ocean had not yielded all its secrets, but it had offered a glimpse into a world where every human choice was shadowed by the unknown. In that haunting reflection, she understood that some truths were too terrible to be fully known, and that the call of the deep was not just an echo from the abyss, but a mirror to the darkness within every soul. The story of the expedition spread like wildfire, a modern parable of ambition, obsession, and the perilous pursuit of forbidden knowledge. Elaine's account, laced with the quiet despair of a woman who had looked into the void and seen its reflection in herself, challenged the world to confront the hidden dimensions of our existence. In the end, the ocean remained as enigmatic and relentless as ever, an eternal, unfathomable force that reminded humanity of its insignificance and the silent, unyielding terror that lurked just beneath the surface. Adam Rankin had always thought of himself as a man who recognized the shape of his own fate. Years of poring over insurance claims had taught him that everything, homes, businesses, people, was prone to unexpected ruin. He'd learned to read cracks in drywall like stress fractures in a human psyche, an unnoticed weakness waiting for the slightest pressure to break. So it felt almost predictable when he found himself driving down a desolate two-lane highway under leaden clouds, heading for a motel on the outskirts of a town he'd never heard of. An odd call from his boss had sent him here. No explanation, just a cryptic text that read, "Check into the Tilden Motel. Ask for room 10. It was a bizarre request for an insurance investigator, but Adam had been around enough corporate corners to suspect this was some hush-hush matter. Possibly a quiet settlement or a hush-money case. He couldn't have guessed it would lead to the strangest night of his life. He arrived shortly after dusk, headlights slicing through the motel's neglected parking lot. The place had a retro neon sign that flickered weakly. Tilden Motel. No cars, but his own. The air felt too still. Gravel crunched under his shoes as he stepped out and glanced around for signs of life. A single, sputtering, overhead lamp illuminated the check-in office. Inside, the front desk looked abandoned. An old-fashioned bell sat on a chipped counter, behind which hung a series of large plastic room keys. Adam eyed them. Every key from 1 to 12 was there. But right where 11 should have been, there was only a faded patch of pegboard with no label. He reached for the desk bell and rang it. The clink of metal echoed painfully in the silence. A woman in her 60s, wearing a baggy cardigan, eventually shuffled in from a back office. She introduced herself as Irene, manager and part-time night clerk. Wiping her hands nervously on her apron, she asked for his name. Adam explained he had a reservation under Rankin. Irene flipped through the tattered ledger with slow, methodical turns of each page. "Room 10, right?" Adam said, hoping to speed up the process. Irene's eyebrows twitched in mild surprise. "No, sir. I have you in room 9, she replied, voice threaded with apology. "Our 10th room is, well, it's not available right now. Renovations." He gave a confused frown. "My boss specifically said room 10. Irene's gaze drifted to the ledger in her hand. She looked uneasy, then shook her head. "My records say room 9. Adam opened his mouth to protest, but stopped. She seemed so resolute, and the last thing he wanted was a confrontation. He had enough on his mind. "Fine," he said. "Room 9, then." With effort, Irene lifted a key from the wall, slid it across the counter, and tried for a smile. Her eyes darted to the space where the missing 11 label would be, but she said nothing more. Outside, the wind had picked up, rattling the metal railing. Adam walked along the row of motel doors. A single overhead light buzzed and flickered, casting everything in disjointed shadows. He found room 9. It smelled faintly of stale cigarettes, though a no-smoking sign was taped to the door. Inside, the bedspread was a washed-out floral pattern. The single lamp barely lit the corners. He put his bag down, drew the curtains, and collapsed onto the bed with a groan, feeling the tension in his neck. Usually, he'd pull out files or open his laptop to review whatever insurance matter had brought him here. But tonight, there was no file, no case name, no clue. Just the odd directive from his boss. He studied the blank ceiling, mind drifting. The musty odor mingled with a faint chemical smell, like bleach covering something metallic. Then he noticed, by the dresser, wedged under the door, was a small square of cardboard. A motel key, scuffed plastic attached to a ring. He got up, bent down, and recognized a gold engraving that read, "Room 11. He blinked. He had just seen the key rack in the lobby. Room 11 had no label, and Irene had said nothing about it. A prickle of unease rolled up his spine. Curiosity battled caution. He had been told to ask for room 10, not 11. Why would it appear here, now, slipped under the door? A mistake? A prank? Adam locked the chain on his door, then tested the key in his hand. It felt cold, heavier than the other motel keys he'd held. He found himself stepping back into the corridor, scanning the row of rooms. They went up to 12, but skipping 11. Painted on each door was a black stenciled number. 10. 12. No, 11. The gap was obvious. There was just a meter-wide span of wall between doors 10 and 12. But if there was no door, how could there be a room 11? He wanted to laugh it off, some local quirk. A quick search online might yield a novelty story about a motel that superstitiously skipped 11, like buildings that omit the 13th floor. But the key in his hand felt almost urgent, like an invitation or a warning. He took a breath, tried to quell the sense of being watched, and decided to check in with Irene. He found the office door locked. Lights off. A single piece of tape on the window read, "Back soon." She had vanished within minutes of giving him the wrong key. Typical, he thought. But this was more than typical small-town inefficiency. Something about the place felt orchestrated, like pieces moving around him. Back in room 9, he flicked on the TV out of habit, only to be greeted by static. No cable, or maybe not even local channels. The hush of white noise filled the space, intensifying the emptiness. When he turned the TV off, the silence felt louder. Adam tried to shrug it off and forced himself to rest. He would handle the confusion in the morning. But he couldn't sleep long. Dark dreams of abandoned hallways and hidden doors spun in his head. Waking suddenly, he found it was nearly 2 a.m. The motel was silent, but outside, a single light was on. Somewhere near where room 11 should have been, if it existed. That faint glow seeped into the corridor. Against better judgment, Adam got up, slid into his shoes, and took the room 11 key. The corridor was chilly, and each of his steps echoed as though the building were hollow. He reached the spot between 10 and 12. The plaster looked normal but slightly misaligned, like a veneer or a sealed entryway. He felt along the seam with cautious fingertips. A sharp click made him jump. The wall seemed to shift inward, leaving a crack wide enough to slip his fingers into. Heart pounding, he pulled, revealing a narrow door behind that chunk of plasterboard. The paint peeled at the edges. Sure enough, an antique doorknob glinted in the half-light, the faint shape of a tarnished metal plate stamped with the number 11. Adam stared, mind reeling. A door hidden behind a false panel, as though the motel owners had tried to erase its existence. He glanced at the key in his hand, then at the doorknob. "Why am I doing this?" an inner voice shouted. But he had come too far to ignore it. He slid the key into the lock. It turned with surprising ease, and the door pushed open onto stale darkness. He fumbled for a light switch. A single overhead bulb flickered alive, illuminating a room seemingly stuck in another era. The wallpaper, once pastel yellow, had darkened to a musty brown. The furniture looked decades old, the bed stripped bare, and a battered dresser loomed on one wall. There was a thick layer of dust everywhere, as though no one had stepped inside for years. Yet something about the space felt used. Footprints disrupted the dust near the bed. A small desk lamp was on, casting a sickly amber glow. As Adam ventured deeper, he noticed pinned to the walls were old newspaper clippings, some crumbling at the edges. Names and grainy photos of people who'd gone missing in the area over the last 20 or 30 years. The pinned articles described robberies, homicides, suspicious suicides. Tilden Motel was mentioned more than once. Adam's pulse hammered. This was a hidden shrine to real-life crimes. He recognized some of these cases from his professional life. Claims that had crossed his desk regarding bizarre, unsolved disappearances. A teenage girl gone missing in 1989. A traveling salesman never checked out. A teacher rumored to have a meltdown while staying at a roadside motel. All linked to Tilden, or perhaps not officially linked. But this plaster-walled room told a different story. On the desk lay a battered guest book, leather cover, half rotten. Trembling, Adam flipped it open. Columns of names and dates scrawled by different hands filled each page. Some entries were decades old. Inexplicably, Adam spotted a fresh entry at the very bottom of the last page. A Rankin check-in date, March 18th. Next of kin, he stared, heart pounding so loud it hurt his ears. Had someone forged his signature? It looked eerily similar to his own, though the pen strokes were heavier. This wasn't coincidence. He was being lured here. Something purposeful was at work. Then came the faintest sound from the hallway. A dragging shuffle, like footsteps across worn carpet. A chill raced through Adam. He snapped the guest book shut, pressed himself against the wall, listening. The door was slightly ajar. soft light spilled in from the corridor. He sensed someone out there quietly crossing the threshold into room 11. He held his breath. The door creaked. A silhouette, thin, unsteady, slipped into the gloom. In the flickering overhead bulb, he recognized Irene. She looked older than before, eyes glassy as though she walked in her sleep. She seemed neither surprised nor afraid to find Adam in the hidden room. If anything, she looked resigned, carrying a small leather folder in her hands. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered, voice trembling. "No one is supposed to see room 11, not anymore." Adam struggled to keep his tone calm, but adrenaline spiked through him. "Why does this room exist at all, Irene?" She inhaled, ragged. "Because secrets do, because guilt does." Her eyes flicked to the pinned newspapers. "They used to say this motel was cursed. People who came here were running from something. Then they never left." She stared at him. "Are you running from something too?" Adam clenched his fists. Memories of a wrongdoing he'd buried threatened to surface. 2 years ago, he'd tampered with a major claim file to protect a corporate giant from paying out. That client had been implicated in a chemical spill that left several families homeless. And Adam had coldly done his job, burying evidence, twisting facts. He never forgot the faces of those families. Sometimes he dreamed about them. The shame still gnawed at him. But it didn't explain this. Who pinned these articles? Who's forging my name in that book? Irene opened the leather folder she'd brought, pulled out a photograph. It showed a half-lit motel corridor, shot from an odd angle. Adam stood in the photograph, captured mid-step. Judging by his clothes, it could have been earlier that night. "There's a reason your boss sent you here," she said. "The company's known about Tilden for years. Some arrangement was made to keep it quiet." Her voice quavered, as if reciting an old confession. "They let Tilden do what it does, a trade for silence." Adam stepped closer, desperate for answers. "What do you mean, what it does?" Her trembling hands placed the photograph on the desk. "In my father's day, there was a conspiracy that Tilden was built as a way station for people who needed to vanish, or be vanished. We had rumors of blackmail, cults, corporate hush-ups. I was just a child, but I saw guests come in with fear in their eyes and never see daylight again." Tears formed at the corners of her eyes. Room 11 was where they kept evidence, the names, the footprints. "The walls have seen crimes I can't repeat, and no one on the outside dared ask questions." Adam's stomach twisted. "So, my company used this place to—" She nodded. "To remove complications. Insurance payouts, suspicious claims, whistleblowers, people who threatened bottom lines. Some never got to speak." She tapped the guest book. "They were signed in here, unofficially, and never signed out." The panic in Adam's throat felt suffocating. "But I'm not a threat, I just do my job." Irene's lips tightened into a sad line. "Maybe you know too much. Or maybe your time has run out for something you've done." She whispered then, a shaky breath. "They told me you might not make it out by morning." She pressed a key into his hand. A different shape, more modern. "There's a back exit near the laundry room. Not even the manager's aware of it. Go. Now." Adam was about to bolt when a new voice spoke from the doorway, low and gravelly. No point running. A man in a gray suit stepped into the flickering light. His face was calm in that corporate way Adam recognized, like an executive used to controlling situations. He carried a sidearm and a half-visible shoulder holster, an ID tag clipped to his belt. "Armistead," regional director. Adam realized with sickening clarity that this was the man who oversaw many high-stakes insurance accounts. The man who quietly made big problems disappear. Irene gasped, stepping back. Adam's eyes darted to the side door, but Armistead lifted his gun in a casual arc. No sudden moves. He sounded almost bored. "I knew you'd come here, Rankin. I engineered the tip from your boss. We needed to see if you'd behave, or if you'd try to uncover truths better left hidden." "Why?" Adam forced out. "Because you're sloppy," Armistead said. "You left traces after that chemical spill cover-up. Then you started sniffing around old claims. We can't allow a liability of your enthusiasm." Adam's mind spiraled. They had set him up. This entire motel was a honey trap, a place to snare employees who knew too much or who might cause trouble. He felt anger flare, but also guilt. He had been digging back into old records lately, questions gnawing at him. Maybe that set off alarms. And here they were, about to end him in some quiet corner of an abandoned room. Irene, trembling, spoke in a plea. "He hasn't done anything beyond what you told him." Armistead silenced her with a glare. "I keep the arrangement. Tilden keeps quiet, remains off the map, so to speak." He flicked a glance at the peeled wallpaper and the pinned articles. "Should have been sealed for good." Adam forced his voice steady. "So you're just going to make me disappear?" Armistead leveled a cold stare. "That's typically how it goes. We prefer not to leave loose ends." The way he said it was clinical, a man used to signing off on quiet executions. "But I might consider an alternative if you listen carefully." He paused, letting the tension soak in. The company needs scapegoats for that chemical spill fiasco, for other messy cover-ups, and we can spin it that you manipulated evidence for personal gain. If you sign a confession, name yourself as the culprit, we'll let you walk away. Quietly, no bullet, no body. Are we clear? Adam's heart thrummed. This was blackmail. They wanted a sacrificial lamb to appease the authorities or the press. If he complied, they'd bury him in legal ruin. If he refused, he'd just vanish tonight. He weighed his slim chances. Maybe he could tackle Armistead, but a single bullet would end it. Irene looked petrified, as though hoping he'd choose the lesser evil. Outside, the wind keened, and thunder rumbled in the distance. He thought of the families from the chemical spill, of how the corporation had deflected blame, and how he'd been complicit. He thought of all the missing people who'd come through this place, who might have refused to sign away their souls, paid with their lives. Something in him snapped. The quiet shame turned to a cold fury. He'd done so many things for the company's benefit, told himself it was just business. Now he saw, with raw clarity, the cost. He feigned a nod. "Fine," he murmured. "I'll sign." Armistead lowered his weapon slightly, reaching into his suit pocket for a folded document. That half-second was all Adam needed. He lunged, slamming into the man's gun arm. The weapon discharged with a flash, bullet embedding in the drywall behind them, a muffled echo rattling the hidden room. Adam seized Armistead's wrist, twisting. The gun clattered to the ground. Irene screamed, cowering against the dresser. The two men grappled, silhouettes thrashing. Armistead was stronger than he looked, landing a punch that nearly buckled Adam's knees. Pain exploded behind Adam's eyes, but he fought through it. He rammed Armistead into the doorframe. A sickening crack reverberated. The man slid to the floor, unconscious or worse. Heartbeat roaring, Adam grabbed the fallen weapon. He turned to Irene, who stared at him in shock. "You can still leave," she stammered. "Go through the back exit. Drive away. He won't stop." Adam was panting. "Come with me." Tears slipped down her lined face. "I can't," she whispered. "The motel, these crimes, it's all I've known. I tried to help once before, told a traveler how to escape. They made sure I never left. I'm too old, too afraid." Her voice cracked. "But you, maybe you can get out, expose them, end it." He wanted to grab her hand, drag her to the car, but footsteps in the corridor shook him from that impulse. Doors opening, maybe more men. The shot had obviously drawn attention. If he lingered, he'd be overwhelmed. He gave Irene a final pleading look, but she shook her head in resignation. Adam fled into the hallway. Each corridor light flickered ominously, as if the motel itself was alive with protest. From behind him came muffled shouts. A figure in dark clothing emerged at the far end, brandishing something metallic. He sprinted the other way, heart hammering, rounding a corner behind the old laundry room. Just as Irene said, there was an exit door leading outside. He shot the bolt, shoved it open. An icy gust of wind and rain lashed his face. The storm had arrived in earnest. Lightning illuminated the deserted parking lot, turning the puddles into mirrors that reflected jagged forks of brilliance. He heard a door slam behind him. Armistead's backup. Or perhaps Armistead himself if he'd regained consciousness. Adam gripped the stolen gun, adrenaline surging, and ran. He reached his car, fumbling for his keys. He prayed it would start. The engine coughed to life just as two figures bolted out from the motel's entrance, shouting. Gravel spat under the tires, the windshield wipers squeaking frantically. He tore onto the highway, breath coming in ragged gasps. The night stretched out in front of him like a yawning void. Rain pelted down, smearing the edges of his headlights. After a mile, he glanced at his rearview mirror, no headlights following. He tried to quell the tremor in his hands, tried to steady his breathing. His mind reeled with images of that hidden room, the pinned-up stories of missing guests, and the near-fatal confrontation. He could still taste the motel's stale air in the back of his throat. A cold, unwavering clarity settled over him. He was done running. If he kept silent, more people would vanish, more horrors covered up. Irene would remain trapped, and the cycle would go on. They might hunt him down, but he had evidence. Photographs on his phone, snaps of the guest book, of the newspaper clippings. He had Armistead's weapon. Even if the local police were compromised, he could try going higher. Anonymously, if needed. Perhaps the FBI, or a journalist with a thirst for corporate scandal. Yes, it meant risking everything, but he saw no other way. Lightning tore across the sky. In that strobe, he noticed a battered sign by the roadside. Next gas, 20 miles. An empty stretch of highway lay ahead. The Tilden Motel's sign was long behind him, lost in sheets of rain. He gripped the steering wheel, trying to assemble a plan. They'd expect him to flee, to vanish. But maybe he'd stop soon, find a payphone or a small police station. He would speak the truth, consequences be damned. He pressed the accelerator, determined. And as he drove on, wind howling, a single question echoed in his mind. Would anyone believe him? A roadside motel with a hidden room that didn't exist on paper, used by a powerful corporation to dispose of liabilities and secrets. It sounded absurd, like an urban legend. But he was living proof. And proof, he decided with a grim smile, was all he had left. Trees blurred in the darkness, and the road curved toward the faint glow of a distant town. Adam felt a flicker of hope in that glow, a promise that maybe he wasn't alone in the night. He caught his own reflection in the rearview mirror, eyes bloodshot, jaw clenched, hair plastered to his forehead by cold sweat and rain. There was no turning back. No more illusions of normalcy. The Tilden Motel and its room 11 might stay hidden for a while longer, but not forever. He resolved to shine light on that darkness, to break the cycle that had claimed so many. And as thunder rumbled overhead, he whispered into the emptiness of the car, "I'm sorry," a plea to the families he'd wronged, and perhaps an apology to himself for all the moral lines he had crossed. Now, at last, he was crossing back. He drove on into the storm, heart pounding, uncertain of where this path would lead, but finally certain of one thing. Silence was no longer an option. The battered key to room 11 lay on the passenger seat, a cold metal relic of unspoken crimes. In the distance, the horizon flickered with dawn's early light, like an omen or a lifeline beckoning him forward. Harlan Voss arrived at the edge of Crestwick just before midnight, windshield wipers beating a frantic rhythm against a freezing drizzle. He had not planned on returning to his hometown so abruptly, and certainly not under these circumstances. But the phone call from his old friend at the local paper, her voice trembling, nearly inaudible, had shaken him in a way he couldn't dismiss. Something in that brief conversation hinted at a collective dread that had seeped into everyone he once knew, muting their voices. He hadn't believed it at first. How could he? An entire town going silent didn't make sense unless it was some bizarre mass protest or a stunt for national attention. Yet, as soon as he stepped out of the car, he felt an unsettling stillness. Not merely the absence of traffic or the hush of a sleepy town at night, but a vacuum where human sound should have existed. The silence was oppressive, like a low-pressure system pressing in on his eardrums, making him hyper-aware of every crunch of gravel beneath his boots. The main street was deserted in the amber glow of the old-fashioned street lamps, and the antique store, the barber shop, the cafe he remembered fondly from childhood, all were sealed behind dark windows. He saw no movement in the windows overhead, no curious faces peeking through curtains. The entire place felt unlived in, like a stage set after all the actors had quietly departed. With his overnight bag slung over one shoulder, Harlan made his way to the Crestwick Inn. It was the only lodging in town that still took in travelers without prior reservations. He tried the door, locked. He knocked, cast a look around the silent street, then fished out his phone to call the front desk. The line rang out in echoing emptiness. Eventually, a figure approached the glass door from inside. Behind it, an older woman. Millie Braun, if Harlan's memory served, peered at him with apprehension in her eyes. There was something about the way she mouthed words he couldn't hear. Then she disengaged the lock with shaking fingers and held the door open just enough for him to slip inside. A wave of stale air hit him, heavy with mildew and old wallpaper glue. Millie motioned for him to follow. She did not speak. Harlan offered a polite greeting that sounded too loud in the hush of the lobby. Her eyes darted downward. She pressed a single finger to her lips in a gesture of caution, then walked to the check-in desk. With a trembling hand, she wrote on a small notepad, "Do you have a reservation?" He shook his head, confusion growing in him. "I don't, but..." Before he could finish, she wrote again, "Cash only. No cards." Another pause, then, "Is that okay?" He gave a slow nod, retrieving some bills from his wallet. The entire exchange felt surreal. He could see her lips trembling, as though she wanted to speak but wouldn't or couldn't. Millie handed him a room key, an actual metal key, tarnished and out of date, attached to a battered plastic fob. Her eyes flicked nervously to the wide windows that revealed the empty street, then to him. In them, he read an apology he couldn't fully interpret. He whispered, "Thank you." She merely nodded and motioned for him to go upstairs. He climbed the creaking wooden staircase. Every footstep sounded loud. At the end of the corridor, he found his room, number 8, unlocked it, and slipped inside. The faint scent of lemon polish mingled with the must of disuse. A single table lamp glowed, revealing a modest bed with worn linens. He shut the door carefully, locked it, then sank onto the edge of the mattress. A swirl of questions filled his mind. Why was Millie silent? Had something happened to her voice, or was she just abiding by some unspoken order? He reached for his phone, swiped to his call log, and stared at the last received call. Lori Durham, a friend he hadn't spoken to in ages, a staff writer for the Crestwick Recorder. Her whispered message had been unsettling. "They're not speaking, Harlan. Nobody's speaking. Please come." Then the line had cut off. He called her back twice, no answer. A few texts went unread. That had been 3 days ago. Now, as he sat in the hush of the Crestwick Inn, the unearthly stillness of the town weighed on him like a physical burden. He lay down, ears alert for any stray noise that might break the calm. He hoped for a late-night car engine, a distant train horn, even the soft murmur of a television in another room. But no sound came, only the raspy draw of his own breath in the quiet. Eventually, he fell into a restless sleep. Morning arrived with the faint haze of pale sunlight through dusty curtains. Harlan woke early, uncertain of what he would do first. He had come here with vague intentions, to investigate, to help, to figure out what was happening. But no plan. After a quick shower, during which the water pipes groaned loudly in the hush, he went downstairs. The lobby was empty, though he heard the clink of dishes from behind a half-closed door that led to the kitchen. When he poked his head inside, Millie was there, transferring scrambled eggs from a skillet onto a plate. She saw him, placed the plate on a tray, then held up her palm to stop him from speaking. She wrote again, "Take it. Dining room is next door." He followed her direction. The adjacent dining area was quiet, with old wallpaper and 2 large windows that overlooked the street. A few tables had plates set out, though Harlan noticed no other guests. He sat down and tried the eggs, bland, no salt. A side of toast, no butter. Millie came in, set down a note in front of him. "We had to shut down all supply lines. Sorry about the limited menu." "Millie," he said, "can you tell me what's going on?" His voice sounded jarring even to himself. "Why is no one speaking?" She grimaced and held a trembling finger to her lips again, eyes flicking to the windows as though she feared being overheard. Then she scribbled on her notepad, "Please, just don't speak out loud. It's not safe. Not for me. Not for you." Before he could protest, she tore off the note, crumpled it, and stuffed it into her apron. She left the room, shoulders hunched, leaving him alone in a suffocating silence. Harlan let out a breath. Something had terrified her, or perhaps the entire town, into muteness. He thought of mass hysteria, of the real-life, silent protests he had covered as a freelance journalist. But this didn't feel like a protest. It felt more like dread. Finishing the sorry breakfast, he grabbed his jacket and stepped outside. The daylight revealed Crestwick's transformation more clearly. Street corners that once bustled with weekend farmers' markets now stood deserted. Shop windows displayed outdated closed signs or notes in scrawled handwriting. By appointment only, or no voice, no service. It was eerie, like a ghost town, except he caught glimpses of movement. Behind curtains, in alleys, through the tinted windows of parked cars. People were there. They just didn't want to be seen. He made his way to the Crestwick Recorder, a low-slung brick building on the corner of an abandoned lot. Inside, he found dusty desks, stacked newspapers, and no trace of staff. Old headlines littered a bulletin board near the entrance. Local crimes, a factory closure, fundraising events. He searched the offices, calling out softly, "Laurie? It's me. Are you here?" No answer. The silence pressed in on him again. Then, from the far corner, he heard a faint shuffling. Stepping carefully around a partition, he came upon Laurie. She was seated at her desk, her posture rigid, dark rings under her eyes, her blonde hair in disarray. She looked up at him, startled, then quickly pressed a finger to her lips, just like Millie had. He approached, speaking in a hushed tone. "Laurie, what's going on? You called me." She raised one hand in a gesture begging him to lower his voice. Her other hand shook as she scribbled on a piece of scrap paper. She handed it to him. "It's real. They can't speak or won't speak. We don't know which. People started losing their voices last week gradually. The hospital's overwhelmed. Local authorities say nothing. It's like they're all cooperating with something, but it's not natural." Harlan read the note, feeling a cold dread spread through his chest. He whispered, "But you can still talk. I can hear you now." Her eyes flashed. She shook her head vehemently, scribbling more furiously. "I can't risk speaking out loud. There are ears everywhere. Something's happened to them. Maybe a psychological trigger or fear. If you try to force them to speak, they'll... I've seen people hurt themselves rather than talk." Harlan frowned. "Hurt themselves?" Laurie nodded, tears forming in her eyes. Then she wrote, "A colleague tried to broadcast a radio segment to call for help. Halfway through, he started coughing blood. He couldn't speak after that, something about trauma, or it's like a form of mass obedience. I'm not sure. And the ones in charge are using it to control everyone." She pressed the note into his hand, then gestured at a filing cabinet that stood against the far wall. Harlan recognized it as the archives. She led him there, rummaged through old folders until she produced a file labeled Harbor Hills Psychiatric and Research. The cover was battered, the edges torn from repeated handling. Laurie opened it, pointing at a series of black and white photos of an old building. The sign above the entrance read, Harbor Hills Institute. He recalled hearing about that place in passing. It was a state-run psychiatric facility in the region, rumored to have shut down amid scandal. Some said there had been unorthodox treatments. Others whispered about hush money from corporate sponsors, local politicians. Laurie pointed to a note typed at the bottom of one newspaper clipping. Experimental treatments in the 1970s. Sensory deprivation therapy to treat anxiety, phobias, funding from private donors with unknown interests. She wrote again, "Ever since Harbor Hills closed, certain sponsors have been keen on continuing research, possibly forced experiments on small-town populations. Crestwick might have become a test site. We suspected something was off when local pharmacies started distributing a new medication for stress relief at no cost. But no one would talk about it. Then people began losing their voices. Not just physically, psychologically, like a collective vow of silence, enforced by fear or something else." Harlan's mind reeled. It sounded far-fetched, like a paranoid conspiracy. Yet, standing here, witnessing the hush that smothered an entire community, he couldn't dismiss it. The dread on Laurie's face looked too genuine. He recalled real-life cases of mass psychogenic illness, episodes in which entire groups exhibited bizarre symptoms with no clear cause. But this felt orchestrated. He motioned for Laurie to follow him outside, craving fresh air and a sense of normalcy. He led her to his car, pointing at the passenger seat. She got in, ducking low. Through the windshield, the deserted Main Street appeared even more ominous under a flat gray sky. Drizzle spattered the glass. Harlan turned the key, but the engine coughed and refused to start. A pang of frustration gripped him. Another attempt, another sputter. Dead. Lori wrote on her notepad, "They don't want outsiders driving away, or us driving out." The station manager's truck was sabotaged too. "We're stuck." She underlined the last word with a trembling hand. Harlan cursed under his breath. He couldn't speak above a whisper without feeling a strange guilt, as though the silent buildings might overhear. Gathering his thoughts, he made a plan. Find out who was in charge, or who might be benefiting from this. Silent townsfolk, frightened innkeepers, absent authorities. Perhaps a hush-money arrangement at the local government level. He'd start at the mayor's office, an imposing structure near the center of town. He gestured for Lori to come along. They walked the abandoned sidewalk, passing boarded-up windows. Overhead, a haze of clouds threatened a heavier rain. At one intersection, they spotted a cluster of townspeople gathered around a single figure. As Harlan and Lori drew closer, the group scattered like spooked animals disappearing into storefronts. The lone figure remained, a uniformed police officer standing with arms folded, expression severe. He noticed them, but made no move to approach. Even from a distance, Harlan could see the man's mouth pressed into a thin line, silent. Harlan halted, uncertain. The officer stared, then slowly shook his head, a silent warning. The moment felt tense, like a standoff. Harlan's heartbeat pounded in his ears. Without speaking, he and Lori turned away and continued toward the mayor's office. The officer didn't follow. Soon, they arrived at a neoclassical building, with a wide staircase leading to heavy double doors. The plaque read, Crestwick Town Hall. Normally a bustle of administrative staff, it now looked vacant. They climbed the steps, found the door unlocked, and stepped into a deserted foyer with polished marble floors. The overhead lights buzzed faintly, an unsettling counterpart to the emptiness. Rows of wooden benches lined the walls, a relic of civic gatherings from the town's more hopeful past. They navigated silent corridors until they came to a large door labeled Mayor's Office. It stood ajar. Harlan peeked inside. The office was spacious, with high ceilings and an imposing wooden desk dominating the center. Behind that desk sat Jonas Flynn, the mayor of Crestwick for nearly a decade. Harlan remembered him as an affable figure, quick to shake hands at public events. Now, the man's gaze was distant, like someone who hadn't slept in days. Jonas made no sound as Harlan and Lori entered. He merely stared at them, posture rigid, hands clasped on the desk. A parted set of blinds behind him let in a weak band of daylight that illuminated the lines of stress etched into his face. He raised an eyebrow, waiting. Lori held her notepad. With a shaking hand, she wrote, "Mayor Flynn, we need to know what's happening. Why is everyone silent?" She slid the note across the desk. He read it and pressed his lips together, eyes flicking between them. For a moment, Harlan thought the mayor might break the vow of silence. Instead, he reached into a drawer, removed a crisp envelope and handed it to Lori. Then, he opened his desk calendar and tore out a page, scribbling something on the back. From the investors. Everyone is safer this way. He placed the note face up on the desk and pushed it toward them. Lori snatched it, wide-eyed, as if she couldn't believe what she was seeing. From the investors was all it said. Harlan recalled the secret research funding and the suspicion about Harbor Hills. Investors, that corporate entity behind the experimental medication. He exhaled, voice tight. "What do you mean, safer?" How is forcing an entire town into silence safer for anyone? The mayor's gaze hardened. He rose from his seat slowly, pointed at Harlan, then gestured to his own mouth, like a warning. "Don't speak." Then he motioned for them to leave. It was as though a silent message passed between them. If you try to stop this, you won't get out of town alive. Harlan and Lori retreated into the corridor. Her breaths came quick and shallow, and he could sense the panic building inside her. He placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, guided her back through the hushed foyer and out onto the street. They stepped under the overhang of the building's portico, out of the drizzle. Lori flipped open the envelope the mayor had given her. Inside were typewritten documents, a confidentiality agreement stuffed in with a letter referencing clinical trials. Terms like psychosomatic silence, liability waivers, and enforcement measures dotted the text. Harlan skimmed the lines, anger and disbelief twisting in his stomach. "Is this a contract for the entire town?" he whispered. They can't possibly." Lori clutched his wrist, scribbled a note. "The investors are behind everything. Pharmaceutical or research group. They must have threatened to cut the town off from vital resources if people talked. Or worse. Now the entire population is trapped by fear." Harlan's mind reeled, the hush that strangled Crestwick, the sabotage of cars, the menacing presence of that silent police officer. This was more than mass hysteria. It was orchestrated. He needed evidence to expose it, to get this story out of Crestwick if he could find a way. But how? Everyone was petrified into silence. The local news outlets were compromised. No official seemed willing to break the vow. And phone lines? Even if he tried to call an outside journalist who would believe a story that sounded like a paranoid conspiracy. He glanced down at the battered folder Lori still carried, the Harbor Hills file. "We should go there," he whispered. "If these investors are continuing the old research in secret, maybe we can find proof at the Institute's remains. We can gather what we need and get it out to the world." Lori hesitated, uncertain, but she nodded. It was the only plan they had. Harbor Hills Institute lay on the outskirts of Crestwick, surrounded by thick woods that were notorious for swallowing unwary travelers. Lori insisted they walk rather than try to find another sabotaged vehicle. They set out in the early afternoon, following an old county road that cut through farmland long since gone to seed. The drizzle turned into a steady rain, soaking them as they trudged on, the hush broken only by raindrops pelting the pavement. Occasionally, they glimpsed farmhouses in the distance, windows boarded, sheds collapsed from neglect. It was as if the entire region had fallen under some gloom that stunted not just speech but life itself. They pressed on, the road giving way to a gravel path with potholes filled by murky water. Eventually, the looming shape of Harbor Hills emerged through the trees, a massive stone edifice with shattered windows and ivy strangling its walls. Rusted chain-link fences surrounded the property, though sections were toppled or missing, revealing a yard of weeds and cracked pavement. They slipped through a gap in the fence. Overhead, the sky churned with dark clouds. As they approached, the building's silent corridors beckoned like gaping mouths. A single metal door at the rear, its handle broken, allowed them entry. Inside, the hall smelled of mold and decay, the pale glow of a stormy afternoon filtering through grimy windows. Lori fished out a flashlight from her jacket. Its beam danced across peeling paint and broken tiles. The building's hush felt different from Crestwick's. Here, it was a vacuum of abandonment rather than oppression, but the effect was no less eerie. They moved carefully through the passageways, looking for any sign of recent activity. Suddenly, Harlan paused at a corridor lined with rooms that might have once been patient wards. Some doors were missing, others half off their hinges. Lori's flashlight caught a sign, "Treatment Wing." Next to it, a placard read, "Sensory Deprivation Chambers." The arrow pointed left. They exchanged a look. That must be the place. The corridor felt colder, the floor slick with decades of neglect. Then came the first real sign of modern intrusion. Fresh footprints in the dust, leading to a locked steel door at the end of the hall. Harlan tried the handle, locked. He pressed an ear to the metal, silence on the other side. Lori rummaged in her bag, producing a small multi-tool. With trembling hands, she worked at the rusty lock. It was precarious, but after a minute of painstaking effort, the lock gave with a stubborn click. Harlan pushed the door open. A wave of stagnant air drifted out. The beam of the flashlight revealed a staircase leading downward, deeper into the facility. They descended carefully, each step echoing. The further they went, the more the walls closed in, reeking of damp concrete. At the bottom, they entered a subterranean corridor lined with thick doors. Each door had a narrow, barred window at eye level, a typical design for isolation rooms. Lori's hand shook as she guided the flashlight across the hallway. It fell on something that made her gasp. A modern keypad lock on one of the doors, out of place in this derelict environment. Harlan's pulse quickened. They stepped closer. Next to the keypad was a corporate logo, Elysium Research and Development, the same group that had started distributing medication in Crestwick. Lori tried pressing random keys. The lock beeped negatively. Without a code, they weren't getting in. She stifled her frustration, shining the light around in hopes of clues. That's when Harlan noticed a battered desk in the corner of the hallway, half splintered. Papers spilled from a folder on the desktop. He crouched to gather them, noticing the same logo stamped in red. The documents were typed reports detailing pilot phase, induced communicative suppression. Paragraph after paragraph described administering a serum that targeted the brain's speech centers, exploiting the psychological vulnerabilities of a community already strained by economic decline. The outcome, apparently, was near total compliance. Subjects exhibit extreme aversion to vocalization, citing fear of violent repercussion, further reinforcing silence. He read with mounting horror. This wasn't just unethical, it was monstrous. They were using an entire population to perfect a means of silencing dissent. Perhaps the mass psychological trauma was aided by chemical manipulation. If anyone tried to resist, their bodies rebelled, or they believed harm would come to them or their loved ones. The entire scheme hinged on secrecy and fear. That's why they needed a rural town, cut off from major media, and that's why they had the mayor in their pocket, along with law enforcement. Lori touched Harlan's arm and pointed the flashlight at the next door. A sign read, "Monitoring." She turned the knob. It opened with a groan. Inside, the air was stale and pungent. A row of monitors flickered with static. Along the far wall, cables led to server racks. A single laptop perched on a metal table, its screen in standby mode. Lori tapped the keyboard and it came to life, asking for a password. They exchanged a hopeless look, but then she typed Elysium. Rejected. She tried Harbor Hills. Another beep. Harlan remembered the notes. Pilot phase. He tried that phrase. Still no luck. Lori opened a desk drawer, rummaging through loose papers until she found a sticky note with a string of alphanumeric characters. She typed it in. The screen unlocked. Folders littered the desktop. Medical logs, security feeds, experimental data. Lori double-clicked the security feeds folder. Within moments, video windows opened, revealing time-stamped recordings from throughout Crestwick. Hidden cameras placed in shops, on street corners, in the mayor's office. The last file was from that morning. Harlan's stomach turned. They were watching everyone, confirming compliance. He realized with dread that even the Crestwick Inn probably had hidden cameras. No wonder Millie had been so afraid to speak. They saved the files onto a USB drive Lori found in another drawer. Adrenaline surged through them. They had damning evidence of a corporate-driven conspiracy. Proof that could blow the entire scheme wide open, if they could get out of Crestwick and broadcast it. But something nagged Harlan. Elysium wouldn't leave their facility unguarded. Someone must be close by, monitoring them. As if on cue, footsteps resonated from the corridor outside. Lori quickly closed the laptop lid. They glanced around for an exit, but the only doorway was the one they had come through. The footsteps drew nearer. Harlan motioned for Lori to kill the flashlight. Darkness swallowed them, except for the faint glow from the monitors. He gestured for her to stay behind the desk while he peeked out. A figure moved in the hallway, carrying a flashlight. From the silhouette, it looked like a security guard, wearing a dark uniform and scanning the area with mechanical precision. The beam of light swept over the battered desk outside. Harlan's heart pounded. He ducked back into the monitoring room. The footsteps paused near the open door of the lab. The guard might have noticed the forced lock or the open door. Another step, closer. Harlan held his breath, certain the guard could hear the hammering of his heart. Then a shrill ring erupted in the hallway, the guard's phone. A tense moment passed, and a muffled voice spoke on the other end. Harlan heard the man clear his throat, mumble an acknowledgement, and continue down the corridor in the opposite direction. He exhaled. Lori clenched her eyes shut in relief. For now, they were undetected. They waited a few minutes until the guard's footsteps faded entirely. Then they hurried to retrace their path out of the basement. Ascending the stairs felt agonizingly slow. Every creak of the steps sounded amplified in the hush. At last, they reached the ground floor, scurried through the broken exit door, and fled into the courtyard, hearts racing. Rain pelted them without mercy, but the cold air felt liberating after that oppressive subterranean warren. Night settled over Crestwick, blanketing the ruined farmland and crumbling buildings in darkness. Harlan and Lori took shelter in a dilapidated barn near the fence line of Harbor Hills, wanting to avoid the main roads for fear of encountering security patrols or the local authorities. They used their phones as flashlights, though neither had a signal strong enough for internet or calls beyond the town's immediate vicinity. Inside the barn, the gloom was thick, the smell of damp hay and rotted wood saturating the air. Lori settled against a beam, her face drawn with exhaustion. Harlan's mind whirled, formulating their next steps. They had evidence on a USB drive that implicated Elysium in forced experiments. But how to get it out? Lori tapped his shoulder, handing him a note. "We need a car, something not sabotaged." He nodded. "What about the local radio station's van? It might be a target, but it's worth a shot." He kept his voice low, though the rainstorm outside provided a veil of white noise. She gave him a grim smile, as if acknowledging the risk. But they were too close to back down now. If they could reach the station, maybe there'd be a working vehicle or at least better broadcasting equipment to expose this. A distant thunderclap rattled the barn's rusted roof. Harlan glanced at his phone's dimly lit screen, noticing how late it was. Exhaustion tugged at him, but adrenaline kept him awake. He slid down next to Lori. Their proximity offered a semblance of comfort amid the oppressive night. He thought back to the day's revelations, a silent town bullied into compliance by unseen corporate entities, like a scene from one of those real-life corporate cover-up stories he had always believed existed on the fringe. Yet here it was, real and terrifying, with the potential to destroy lives if no one intervened. Eventually, restless sleep claimed them both. They rose at dawn, bodies stiff and damp from the barn's unforgiving floor. The storm had passed, leaving the air crisp and the ground soft with puddles. Crestwick loomed in the distance, its silent profile tinted by the early morning light. Harlan led the way, keeping off the main roads as they circled back toward town. They stuck to side streets and back alleys, mindful of the patrols or any watchers behind the drawn curtains. The radio station, Crestwick Public Radio, was a modest two-story structure near a deserted parking lot. A rust-streaked broadcast tower stood behind it, leaning slightly as if exhausted by years of disrepair. They spotted a white van parked beside the building, the station's logo peeling on the side panel. Lori gripped Harlan's arm, pointing. It looked like the vehicle might still be intact, no slashed tires or obvious sabotage. They moved quickly. The station's main door was locked. Lori picked it with her multi-tool and they slipped inside. The lobby was dark, the reception desk abandoned. Hallways led to cluttered offices, a break room, and at the far end, a glass window looking into a studio. A battered microphone stood behind that glass, cables coiling across the floor. No staff in sight, just a hush that made the building feel haunted. They found a row of key hooks near the reception desk. One was labeled Station Van. Harlan took it, relief sparking in his chest. Together, they went back outside. The van's driver's side door opened with a squeak. The interior smelled of stale coffee and dust. Harlan cringed at the sight of wires hanging from under the dashboard, but it didn't look intentionally destroyed. More like an ongoing attempt at repairs. "Let's hope it runs," he whispered. He turned the ignition. The starter groaned but caught. The engine sputtered, then rumbled to life. A bolt of hope energized them both. Lori scribbled a note. "We can drive to the next town, get to a bigger city, expose everything." Harlan nodded, shifting into reverse. The tires squished over wet pavement. He glanced around, scanning for watchers. In a second-story window of a neighboring building, a silhouette stood motionless, but he couldn't discern a face. No time to worry. They had to go. He pressed the gas. The van jerked forward, rattling as if it might fall apart at any moment. Lori clutched the armrest, her gaze darting between the side mirrors. Crestwick's empty streets fanned out before them. They picked a route that led to the main highway out of town, a rarely used stretch that cut through farmland and eventually merged with the interstate. For a moment, it looked like they might escape unchallenged. But halfway down Maple Street, a police cruiser appeared behind them, lights off, coasting in their wake. Harlan's heart pounded. He tried to remain calm, maintaining a steady pace. The cruiser picked up speed, inching closer. Lori scribbled, "They know." He gritted his teeth. The road ahead would soon fork. One direction led to the highway, the other deeper into farmland. The cruiser's headlights flicked on, a silent command to pull over. Harlan glanced at Lori. They had a choice: comply and risk losing everything, or attempt to flee. In a burst of determination, Harlan floored the accelerator. The van lurched, engine whining in protest. The cruiser roared to life behind them, siren silent, but lights now flashing. On a deserted street, the chase played out in near silence, only the hiss of tires on wet asphalt and the roar of engines echoing. Lori clung to the door, her eyes wide with panic. The cruiser drew even closer, clearly more powerful than the battered van. Harlan realized they couldn't outrun it. As they reached the fork in the road, he swerved onto the narrower route that led to farmland. The van bounced along cracked pavement, trailing muddy water. The cruiser stayed close, weaving effortlessly. Harlan glanced at the rearview mirror. A second cruiser joined the pursuit, silent lights flashing behind the first. A farmland road emerged, lined with ditches on either side. The van's tires squealed around a sharp bend. Mud sprayed across the windshield. Lori wiped condensation from the inside of the glass with her sleeve. Another bend. The van lurched violently, engine coughing. They were losing speed. Ahead, a collapsed bridge marked the end of the road. Floodwaters churned in the gully below. The ancient wooden planks rotted away. No way to cross. Harlan braked hard, tires skidding across wet gravel until the van came to a jarring halt at the water's edge. Behind them, the cruisers braked. Doors opened. Officers, silent as ghosts, stepped out, guns drawn but muzzle down. Harlan looked at Lori. In her eyes, he saw the same dread he felt in his gut. They had come so close. He shut off the engine, hands trembling. The officers advanced, forming a half circle around the driver's side. Their faces were grim, their mouths pressed shut. One motioned for Harlan and Lori to exit. They complied, stepping into the drizzle, the USB drive of evidence tucked in Lori's jacket pocket. In the hush, the lead officer, heavy-set, hollow-eyed, stared at them. Rain soaked his uniform, but he remained still. Harlan wondered if the man wished he could speak, if he'd been coerced into silence like the others, but the officer merely gestured for them to step aside, presumably to be taken into custody. Harlan's mind raced. If they were arrested, Elysium would destroy the evidence, brand them as criminals, keep Crestwick's silence intact forever. The officer took a step closer, hand outstretched for Lori to surrender. She looked at Harlan, then slowly reached into her jacket pocket. The officer tensed, expecting a weapon. Instead, she pulled out the USB drive, tiny and unassuming in her palm. The officer's gaze flickered with confusion and a hint of panic. Harlan recognized that flicker. Guilt. The officer knew. He was part of the cover-up, or at least complicit. Yet the man's eyes betrayed torment. In a sudden, desperate move, Lori hurled the USB drive into the swirling floodwater below the collapsed bridge. It vanished with a splash. Harlan's stomach twisted. Everything they had risked, gone. She turned to him, tears streaming down her cheeks, but there was a fierce resolve in her eyes. The officer let out a strangled gasp. For a moment, Harlan realized that was the first vocal sound he'd heard from a local official. A strangled gasp, almost like a wordless plea. Then the man's jaw clamped shut, as if terrified of what might happen if he uttered another sound. They'd lost the drive, but at least Elysium couldn't destroy it. Maybe, just maybe, the raging waters would carry it downstream. Someone might find it. A long shot, but a seed of hope. The officers seized Harlan and Lori. Their hands were bound with plastic ties, neither of them resisting. The lead officer jerked his head toward the cruisers, indicating they would be taken in. In that fleeting moment, Harlan realized that, while the physical evidence was gone from his grasp, the knowledge he had gained wasn't. He could speak, he was still capable. And maybe, just maybe, there would be an opening. A chance to get away and tell the story before the silent plague swallowed him too. As they were pushed into the back seat of the cruiser, Harlan caught a final glimpse of Lori's face in the reflection of the rain-speckled window. Her expression was a complex blend of regret and defiance. Outside, the farmland stretched into misty gray, the silhouette of Crestwick looming behind them. A voiceless town caught in a conspiracy far darker than any casual observer could imagine. The door slammed shut. The engine rumbled, and the cruiser turned back toward the silent town. Exhaust smoke curled in the damp air, vanishing into the drizzle as they drove away. In the hush, Harlan felt the pounding of his heart and the unyielding resolve forming in his mind. They might have lost the USB drive in that swirling current, but the truth was still out there, churning like an unstoppable tide. He wasn't done fighting. Even in silence, the truth had a way of surfacing, and if anyone could shatter the hush that held Crestwick hostage, it was someone still willing to speak. Elias stepped into the rain-soaked night, the city's neon reflections rippling on puddles like ghostly memories. Every step on the slick pavement echoed against the empty alleys of a metropolis that never slept. A relentless urban theater of despair and dark secrets. He pulled his collar up as if warding off not just the chill, but also the creeping dread of the unknown. Tonight, the weight of his personal tragedies mingled with the murmur of an urban conspiracy that had clawed its way into his restless mind. Weeks ago, an anonymous tip had sent him spiraling into a labyrinth of half-forgotten true crime cases, obscure cult rituals, and psychological oddities. Among the whisperings of an ancient curse, one artifact had emerged as an unlikely centerpiece, a weathered, almost forgotten relic. An odd, gnarled monkey's paw. It had surfaced at an estate sale in a dilapidated part of the city, surrounded by rumors of a cult that believed in twisting fate. That small piece of wood, etched with cryptic symbols and a history of sinister coincidences, promised to grant wishes at a price no one truly understood. Elias had always been a man on the fringes of hope and despair, a relentless seeker of truth who had suffered personal loss more than once. His sister's untimely death, the unsolved mystery that had tormented his nights, had left him with a hollow ache. As a journalist with a penchant for uncovering dark, hidden realities, he had encountered enough conspiracies to fill countless notebooks. But this was something entirely different. The cursed artifact was not a mere trinket of folklore. It was an insidious instrument of fate, a device that manipulated desire with lethal precision. That fateful evening, Elias retrieved the artifact from a secure storage locker arranged by an informant whose voice trembled with warnings over the phone. The pawn was clutched in a velvet-lined box, its surface rough and scarred by time. As he held it, a chill danced up his spine, a sensation as if the relic whispered silent promises and threats all at once. Its presence unsettled him deeply, but there was a perverse allure in its possibility, a chance to rewrite history, to undo the irreversible. Days blurred into sleepless nights. Elias found himself haunted by a recurring thought, a wish he barely dared to whisper, to bring back the one he'd lost. In the shadowy recesses of his mind, the desire for retribution against fate gnawed at him. Fueled by desperation and the moral ambiguity that had become his constant companion, he formulated a wish. Under the dim light of his cramped apartment, where rain tapped against the windows like a morbid metronome, he pressed his trembling hand against the relic and murmured, "Return what was taken from me." In that moment, the city seemed to hold its breath. The distant hum of traffic, the occasional wail of a siren, and the incessant patter of rain all converged into an eerie silence that wrapped around him like a shroud. The monkey's paw seemed to pulse beneath his fingers, its ancient carvings almost alive in the flickering light of a solitary lamp. For an instant, he believed that fate itself was bending to his will. The next morning, as pale sunlight fought its way through dense clouds, Elias awoke with a sense of disquieting anticipation. The relic lay innocuously on his desk, its presence both comforting and ominous. In the quiet moments of dawn, he stepped into the day with a cautious hope that perhaps, just perhaps, his wish had been granted. But as the hours slipped by, a creeping realization began to take shape. The city was unchanged. The cacophony of urban life continued unabated, indifferent to his secret. Yet, in the midst of its bustling routine, subtle disturbances began to surface. At first, it was a fleeting encounter on a crowded street, a stranger whose eyes held a mournful glint and whose smile was twisted by sorrow. The man muttered fragmented words of regret and loss, as if carrying a burden too heavy to share. Later, Elias stumbled upon a series of police reports involving a bizarre string of events. A series of accidents, unsolved crimes, and inexplicable coincidences that bore an uncanny resemblance to the notion of a reversed fate. In each case, victims seemed to reappear or circumstances morphed in strange ways, turning personal tragedies into public nightmares. Each thread led back to that cursed relic. Haunted by these ominous signs, Elias began to document the disturbing patterns with meticulous detail. Late nights found him in the dim glow of his computer screen, cross-referencing news articles, police logs, and whispered confessions of those who had once come into contact with the cursed object. Among the cases was one that stood out, a chilling true crime story involving a secretive cult. This group, long disbanded and scattered, had worshipped the power of fate. They believed that destiny was malleable and that by harnessing forbidden artifacts, one could rewrite the tapestry of life. Their experiments had left behind scars on the lives of many, and their methods were as cruel as they were calculated. In the murky margins of society, Elias discovered that the monkey's paw was not merely a relic, it was a weapon of calculated despair. The investigation led him to an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city, a relic of a bygone industrial era, where echoes of forgotten labor still whispered through rusted machinery. Here, in the sprawling darkness, Elias encountered another figure, Marisol, a former cult member whose life had been shattered by her involvement in the clandestine rituals. Her eyes, once filled with fervor, now reflected only regret and shattered innocence. In hushed tones, she recounted her role in the cult's experiments, her voice trembling with a mix of sorrow and defiance. She had witnessed the cursed object's terrible influence firsthand, as a wish after wish had torn families apart and left scars that defied healing. Under the dim light of the warehouse, amidst crates covered in dust and remnants of past horrors, Marisol's story unfolded like a cinematic flashback. She described clandestine gatherings in darkened rooms, the palpable tension of desperate ambition, and the ultimate realization that the price of tampering with fate was far steeper than anyone could imagine. Her words painted a picture of a secret world, where ambition and despair coexisted in a delicate, dangerous balance. Yet, even as she spoke, there was a lingering hint of hope, a desire to undo the wrongs of the past, even if it meant facing the darkness within oneself. Elias listened intently, every word etching itself into his memory. Her narrative, full of moral ambiguity and raw emotion, resonated with his own inner torment. In that moment, he felt both the burden of his wish and the weight of his guilt. The desire to reclaim what he had lost had come at a cost he was only beginning to fathom. The relic, now pulsating with an almost malevolent energy, was not a mere tool for retribution. It was a mirror reflecting his own desperate longing, twisted by the cruelty of fate. As the days passed, the consequences of his wish began to unravel in unpredictable, horrifying ways. Subtle shifts in reality morphed into catastrophic events. A seemingly random car accident in which a beloved community leader was fatally injured was later revealed to have been averted by a series of inexplicable circumstances. Lives were rearranged like pieces on a chessboard, the outcomes as bitter as they were ironic. Elias found himself trapped in a web of consequences that spiraled far beyond his control. Each altered fate was a grim reminder that every wish carried its own hidden, unspeakable toll. Haunted by visions of what could have been, and tormented by the mounting evidence of fate's cruel twist, Elias began to question the nature of destiny itself. His once unyielding belief in rationality faltered under the weight of the inexplicable events that now punctuated his existence. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw flashes of faces, some familiar, others alien, all bearing the marks of tragedy. The line between victim and perpetrator blurred, and the moral clarity he once possessed dissolved into a murky haze of ethical uncertainty. Late one night, as a violent storm battered the city, Elias returned to the warehouse, determined to confront the relic and its sinister legacy. The rain hammered the concrete, and the air was thick with the smell of ozone and decay. In the gloom, Marisol waited with a quiet resolve, her eyes reflecting the storm's fury. She had come to warn him, perhaps even to guide him away from the path he had unwittingly chosen. Under the flickering glow of a single, bare bulb, Marisol spoke of the finality of wishes. "You must understand," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the clamor of the storm, "that altering fate is like trying to rewrite a script that's already been written. Every change, every desire leaves scars, and sometimes the scars write the ending." Elias's heart pounded as he stared at the relic. It seemed to throb with a life of its own, its surface alive with shifting patterns that defied logic. In that charged moment, he recognized the horror of his own hubris. The cursed object was not an instrument of salvation. It was a harbinger of irrevocable change, a token that extracted a steep price from those foolish enough to challenge destiny. In a burst of clarity, Elias recalled the numerous cases he had documented, stories of lives upturned, of hope twisted into despair. Each tale was a testament to the dark allure of tampering with fate, and as he reached out to seize the relic one last time, a sudden, overwhelming surge of dread overtook him. It was as if the relic, aware of his inner turmoil, was retaliating against his reckless ambition. A deafening crack of thunder shook the warehouse, and for an instant the world seemed to split into a series of disjointed, nightmarish snapshots. Elias's mind flashed with images of his sister's smiling face, the grim faces of those who had suffered, and a vast, unyielding void of regret. In that chaos, the cursed pawn slipped from his grasp, tumbling across the cold concrete floor. Its fall was the final punctuation in a sentence of despair, and in that moment, Elias knew that no wish, no matter how desperately wished for, could undo the irrevocable damage done by playing with fate. As the storm subsided into a mournful drizzle, Elias and Marisol stood in silence. The relic lay shattered, its fragments reflecting a grim mosaic of light and shadow. In the shattered pieces, Elias saw the twisted truth of his actions. His wish had not resurrected the past, but had rewritten it in a cruel parody of redemption. The lives it had touched, his own and those around him, were forever marred by the consequences of a desire to reclaim what was lost. In the weeks that followed, Elias continued his investigation, now burdened with the knowledge that fate was a labyrinth of moral ambiguity and shattered illusions. The city, too, bore the scars of his wish, its inhabitants unknowingly ensnared in a web of predestined tragedy. The once promising possibility of reclaiming the past had become a somber lesson in the futility of defying destiny. Late at night, as Elias sat in his cramped apartment with rain tapping against the window and the neon glow of distant billboards casting spectral hues across his desk, he penned the final lines of his account. His words, raw and unfiltered, were a confession, a testament to the darkness that lurked within every human desire. He realized that the true horror lay not in the cursed object, but in the relentless yearning to undo the irreversible. It was a truth that echoed through the empty corridors of his soul, a chilling reminder that every wish, no matter how noble or desperate, demanded a price that could never be repaid. In the dim light of that uncertain dawn, Elias vowed to share his story with the world. His account was not just a chronicle of the cursed monkey's paw, but a mirror reflecting the frailty of human nature, a stark portrayal of how the pursuit of impossible dreams can lead to an irreversible descent into darkness. And as he closed his notebook, the echo of the relic's final, silent whisper lingered in the air, a haunting refrain that would forever haunt the shadows of his mind. The city continued its relentless rhythm, indifferent to the secrets that lay buried in its underbelly. Yet, for those who dared to peer beneath the surface, Elias's story served as a grim reminder that in the pursuit of altering fate, one might just unleash a torrent of sorrow, a cascade of unintended consequences, and a dark destiny that no wish could ever undo. In the end, the cursed monkey's paw was not merely a relic of ancient lore, but a symbol of the perilous dance between hope and despair, a warning that the price of tampering with destiny might be the very soul of those who dare to dream. The gallery's white walls gleamed under dim, ambient lights as Mara Delacroix adjusted the final sculpture into place. It was nearing midnight in the heart of a sprawling urban labyrinth, and the city's pulse could be felt in the low murmur of distant traffic and the whispered secrets of those who passed by in the cool night. Mara's reputation as a curator was built on her unerring eye for the obscure and the macabre, a taste honed during years navigating the undercurrents of contemporary art and the darker sides of human expression. Tonight, however, was unlike any exhibition she had ever curated. The silent exhibition was her most ambitious project yet, a collection of sculptures created by a reclusive artist known only as Corvin. The artist had vanished almost as soon as his work was discovered, leaving behind only the twisted, lifelike forms that hinted at hidden depths and unsettling histories. Each sculpture, painstakingly crafted, bore an uncanny resemblance to real people, figures whose eyes seemed to hold a secret agony or an unspoken plea for redemption. Mara paused before one particular piece, a nearly life-sized sculpture of a woman with a vacant, sorrowful expression, seated in a pose reminiscent of quiet despair. The details were exquisite, delicate, almost painful contours that captured the vulnerability of human experience, and a subtle shift in posture that suggested movement long after the artist's chisel had dried. It was as if the sculpture breathed the memories of those lost in quiet tragedies. She couldn't shake the sensation that the eyes of the statue followed her across the room. In the days leading up to the opening, whispers of Corvin's mysterious past began to coalesce into a narrative that hovered on the edge of conspiracy. Rumors surfaced that his works were more than mere art. They were vessels for human emotions, crafted during secret gatherings that resembled cult rituals. An obscure true crime case from years ago hinted that several local figures had disappeared after attending one such gathering, leaving behind only cryptic letters and unsettling photographs. Critics debated whether Corvin's sculptures were his way of immortalizing those lost souls, or of warning against the dangerous allure of unchecked ambition. Mara's own history was littered with shadows. A decade earlier, a scandal had nearly derailed her career. A scandal involving a controversial piece that blurred the lines between art and exploitation. The scrutiny had forced her into a quiet seclusion, until a chance encounter with a renowned investigator in art forgery rekindled her determination to restore her reputation. Tonight, as she stepped through the heavy doors of the gallery, Mara was determined to prove that beauty could exist even in the murk of human misery, even if it was crafted in the depths of darkness. The opening was an uncharacteristic affair, attended by an eclectic mix of art critics, journalists, and collectors. Their hushed conversations reverberated against the walls like a low hum, adding a layer of tension to the already charged atmosphere. In a secluded corner of the gallery, a live feed from a hidden camera captured every moment of the exhibition. Mara had arranged for this discreet surveillance, driven by a gnawing instinct that the sculptures, and perhaps the exhibition itself, might harbor secrets that could ignite unforeseen consequences. Among the guests was Theo Marlowe, an investigative journalist whose career had been built on peeling back the layers of powerful institutions. With a careful eye for detail and a skeptical mind, Theo had attended the exhibition after receiving an anonymous tip about a series of art-related disappearances. His gaze was deliberate, scanning the room as he documented subtle shifts in the sculpture's placements, a detail that Mara, despite her careful arrangements, had not anticipated. As Theo walked by the sculpture of the sorrowful woman, he paused, noting how the piece seemed slightly askew, as though it had been moved by an unseen hand. In the midst of the murmuring crowd, Mara's thoughts churned with unease. She recalled the night she first encountered Corvin's work in a forgotten warehouse, tucked away in a labyrinthine alley of an industrial district. The air had been thick with the scent of rust and decay, and shadows clung to every surface. There, amid discarded relics and broken dreams, the sculptures had whispered to her a promise of truth and transcendence, a promise that now, years later, seemed to be unraveling into a nightmarish reality. As the evening unfolded, small but significant anomalies began to emerge. A collector, known for his sharp instincts, mentioned in hushed tones that one of the sculptures in the center of the gallery, a grotesque figure of a man with a vacant smile, had subtly changed its expression over the course of the night. No one could pinpoint exactly when or how the transformation had occurred, but the shift was undeniable. Other attendees reported fleeting sensations of being watched, as if the art itself was alive and intent on communicating something. These murmurs, initially dismissed as the product of an overactive imagination fueled by the ambiance of the event, soon morphed into a palpable tension that darkened the room. Mara moved through the gallery with a measured grace, her presence both reassuring and inscrutable. Every step she took echoed with the weight of unspoken fears and buried secrets. She stopped before a secluded alcove, where a series of smaller sculptures had been arranged in a circle, almost ritualistically. These pieces, unlike the rest of the collection, were raw and unfinished, like fragments of memories hastily chiseled from stone. Their unfinished nature lent them a haunting immediacy, as if they were desperate attempts to capture fleeting moments of despair. The air here was colder, and the silence more profound, a silence that seemed to demand acknowledgement of the suffering that had birthed them. In that moment, Mara felt a prickle of anxiety. She recalled an obscure psychological disorder she had once studied, a condition where victims, subjected to extreme emotional trauma, began to perceive inanimate objects as conduits of malevolent intent. Was it possible that the raw emotion infused in these sculptures was not merely artistic expression but a reflection of a deeper, more disturbing reality? The thought sent a shiver down her spine, but she pushed it aside. convinced that the unsettling nature of Corvin's work was simply an artistic manifestation of a tortured soul, rather than a prelude to something more sinister. As the clock neared the hour of final admission, Theo's instincts drove him toward the back of the gallery, where a restricted section lay hidden from the general public. With a blend of determination and trepidation, he maneuvered through a narrow corridor lined with heavy velvet drapes. His flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating brief glimpses of sculptures that appeared to be even more lifelike and disturbing than those in the main hall. He paused before a piece that struck him with an overwhelming sense of déjà vu, a sculpture of a man with a hauntingly familiar face, eyes that mirrored his own hidden anxieties. The subtle, almost imperceptible shift in the man's features unsettled Theo. It was as though the sculpture had been molded to reflect not a fixed visage but the mutable essence of fear itself. His mind raced with possibilities. Had the curator tampered with the pieces? Was there a hidden narrative woven into the very fabric of the exhibition? His investigative instincts, honed over years of chasing elusive truths, urged him to document every detail. Meanwhile, Mara's own journey into the darker corridors of the exhibition had led her to confront personal demons. Wandering into a neglected storage room behind the gallery, she found a series of documents and sketches that detailed the clandestine meetings of an obscure group, rumored to have been involved in experimental art and dangerous psychological research. The sketches were raw, almost frantic in their execution, depicting figures in contorted postures and anguished expressions. The documents hinted at a deliberate manipulation of human emotion, a study in the interplay between art and psychological torment. As Mara leafed through the fragile pages, the weight of her own past transgressions pressed upon her. Every misstep in her career, every compromise made in the pursuit of artistic integrity, converged into a moment of bitter clarity. The silent exhibition was not just an art show, it was a mirror reflecting the darkest recesses of the human soul. Her reverie was abruptly shattered by the sound of shattering glass. Rushing back into the main gallery, Mara found a scene that defied explanation. In one corner, where a sculpture had once stood with an air of resigned melancholy, a cluster of onlookers now huddled, their faces twisted in horror. The glass display case that had safeguarded a particularly provocative piece lay in ruins, its contents scattered like broken promises across the polished floor. Amid the chaos, Theo was present, his recorder still in hand, eyes wide with a mixture of triumph and terror. In the ensuing moments, accusations flew like shards of glass. Theo claimed that the altered arrangement of the sculptures pointed to deliberate tampering, a conspiracy meant to invoke a reaction, to blur the lines between art and reality. Mara, her voice steady despite the turmoil churning within her, insisted that the exhibit was conceived as a confrontation with inner fears, not as a staged spectacle for sensationalist headlines. The tension between them crackled in the charged air, a collision of wounded pride and unyielding ambition. As the night deepened, a startling revelation began to crystallize. Late in the evening, while most of the guests had dispersed into the anonymity of the city night, Mara discovered a hidden chamber beneath the gallery, a space that had been sealed off, almost imperceptible except to those who knew where to look. Inside, the walls were lined with photographs and newspaper clippings detailing cases of unexplained disappearances, each one curiously linked to art events or obscure cultural gatherings. In the center of the room was a solitary pedestal, upon which rested a final, unfinished sculpture. This piece, unlike the others, bore the unmistakable imprint of raw terror, a contorted figure with eyes that seemed to pierce the veil between sanity and madness. Mara's heart pounded as the implications sank in. The chamber was not a mere storage area. It was a shrine to a forgotten tragedy, meticulously curated by someone with an intimate understanding of human suffering. The photographs included images of grieving families, desolate urban landscapes, and scenes that hinted at a cult-like obsession with capturing the ephemeral nature of despair. Among the clippings, one article from a decades-old true crime investigation stood out, an account of a series of art-inspired disappearances that had been quietly buried by authorities and dismissed as urban legend. The revelation was a turning point. Mara realized that every element of the silent exhibition had been designed to evoke a visceral reaction, a delicate interplay of beauty and horror that transcended conventional art. It was an invitation to confront the uncomfortable truths that lay hidden beneath the surface of society, to acknowledge the shadows that danced at the edges of human consciousness. The exhibition, in its entirety, was an elaborate confession of guilt and regret, a testament to the idea that art, in its purest form, could force a reckoning with the darkest parts of the psyche. In a final, desperate act of clarity, Mara gathered the evidence and contacted an old friend in the investigative community, someone who had once helped expose corruption at the highest levels. With a grim resolve, she knew that the truth behind Corbin's work, and the sinister forces it represented, could no longer be contained within the sterile confines of an art gallery. As dawn began to break, casting long, distorted shadows through the gallery's windows, Mara prepared to step into the light, ready to confront the mysteries that had haunted her for so long. Outside, as the city stirred awake, Theo reviewed his recordings, the fragments of whispered secrets and hushed arguments interwoven with the ambient clatter of the early morning. His investigation had led him deep into a labyrinth of deceit and beauty, a world where art and agony were inextricably linked, where every sculpture was a silent witness to a tragedy that defied explanation. And in that moment, amid the blurred lines between creator and creation, reality and artifice, he understood that the silent exhibition was not merely a showcase of controversial sculptures. It was a mirror held up to a society that refused to acknowledge its own darkest truths. The gallery, now silent except for the distant hum of a waking city, remained a monument to a night of unyielding tension, a testament to the power of art to provoke, to unsettle, and to ultimately expose the hidden fractures in the human soul. In the quiet aftermath, both Mara and Theo were irrevocably changed, bound together by a shared glimpse into the abyss, where beauty and horror coexisted in a delicate, unbreakable dance. And as the first light of day cast pale hues over the remnants of the exhibition, the final unanswered question lingered in the air like a faint echo. In a world obsessed with perfection and order, could the raw, unfiltered portrayal of human vulnerability ever be anything other than a dangerous, yet necessary, confrontation with the truth?